Is it weird for the two of you to be on a podcast together?
This is a first. We have never done this.
That is not true. We have done it for Astonishing Legends.
Oh, that's true.
Technically Susan's show.
Oh, and my show, but that doesn't count.
Yeah, that actually, not only does that count, it counts double because it's your show and it's your first show. It does count. It double, triple counts. It quadruple counts.
It triple counts.
Yeah.
But it's funny because it's never on Zoom. Like when I was on Susan's show, I just walked into the garage and sat down and leaned over toward a mic and we were just I was in person. And then we were in person when we did Astonishing Legends when Scott still lived out here in LA. We all met up in his sort of back room where he had his setup. So that's true. We were in the same room. So this is the first time it's been this sort of, the way, you and me and Mike. And now
the way we've been doing this essentially since you remember doing podcasts. Did we ever do non-video podcasts, Richard? We must have.
Yeah, we did phone. We just did phone.
That was the shits. That was awful.
Was that in
audio
the before
wise?
time?
It was, It was in the before time because we only started doing video podcasting. I mean, again, nobody's seeing this video, but they're hearing the audio. I think we started doing it like beginning of 2020. It's made podcasting and doing this a lot easier because I can see everybody's timing. Before, I don't know how we did it before. I've tried doing it since and it just feel like I'm fumbling in the dark, genuinely fumbling in the dark. So I don't like doing it that way anymore.
Well, I think it was with COVID because my first memory of Zoom is with I remember not knowing what Zoom was until I was doing it for Titans for the writer's room, and then everything was Zoom, and I assume that's when we started doing it this way.
Yeah.
This is Zoom.
I was just going to say, I remember in the way before time when Skype, I did some meetings on Skype back.
Well, that's how we used to record was on Skype. We just didn't have, we had no video. And then Zoom, we all switched to Zoom because Zoom has a built-in recording function. Skype has no recording function still, I believe.
Yeah. Well, also Skype seemed weirdly less reliable. Skype felt like it was always screwing up and crashing and burning.
Because it was all the time. Because Skype is shit. I don't know who uses Skype anymore. I don't. I used to have a Skype number and I stopped paying for it earlier this year. But yeah, Zoom I think is definitely Zoom is the choice of many who podcast, similarly to nuclear energy, which is the choice of many who in the California area, at least in this film, choose to have their houses nearly irradiated. Because on this episode of the Culture Cast, I am still your host, Chris Dashu, much to the chagrin of many. And I am joined by, if you've listened to 80s TV Ladies, you've heard her before, one half of the hosting duo of that show, Susan Lambert.
Hi, nice to be on the show. Thank you.
And joining us also is Susan's husband. You've heard him many a time before, Richard Hatem, a writer of The Mothman Prophecies and DC Titans. He's an executive producer on DC Titans.
Scram the son of a bitch.
Jesus Christ. Hey, you know what's better than a nuclear reactor almost imploding? Doing it on purpose and not realizing it. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, we're going to have to talk. I think I may be a little bit confused as to some of the things that happen in the last 15 minutes of the movie.
That's fair. On this episode, we are talking about The China Syndrome, a movie whose name is slightly problematic, but in a kind of fanciful way, as Wikipedia puts it. But we're going to be talking about 1979's totally topical, at least for when it came out, and somewhat now, The China Syndrome.
The China Syndrome. It's about people who lie, and people faced with the agony of telling the truth.
Right.
People like Kimberly Wells, a television reporter paid to smile, not to think.
A few words about a veterinarian who makes house calls on sick fish. Or is it aquarium calls?
Richard Adams, a cameraman who never learned how to play by the rules.
Wait till you get in that other room, get that radiation all over that cute little body.
Jack Goodell, an engineer who knows too much to tell the truth.
In anything that man ever does, there's some element of risk, right? Well, that's why we have what we call defense in depth.
And cares too much to lie.
No accident.
It will start with a tremor in a nuclear power plant, where it will end will depend on 3 people.
I would say you're probably lucky to be alive. Same for the rest of Southern California.
Jane Fonda.
Let's face it, you didn't get this job because of your investigative abilities. Kimberly, don't fight it.
Jack Lemmon.
There was a vibration.
Michael Douglas.
I don't know that accident is the right word.
Accident is the right word.
The China Syndrome. The harder they try, the more resistance they meet.
They've got their own security man. Do you hear what I'm saying? Do you want me to make it any clearer?
The closer they get, the more threatening it becomes. The China Syndrome. Today, only a handful of people know what it really means. And they're scared.
Everybody keep your station! Everybody keep your station!
Soon, you will know. The China Syndrome.
So the film is directed by James Bridges. It stars Jane Fonda, Jack Lemmon, and Michael Douglas. I also want to mention one of my favorite actors. Good old James Karen is in there as well for a little bit, and Wilford Brimley. And the film is all about Jane Fonda, who is playing a reporter who happens to be at a thankfully fictional nuclear power plant outside of LA the day that the nuclear power plant goes tits up, as they would say. Jack Lemmon plays the head of the head of the control room, and Michael Douglas is playing a cameraman, which is weird that Michael Douglas takes a back seat in this movie, but makes the most with what he's given, and he's also a producer on the film. Susan, you and I talked about Jane Fonda just a little recently when she was playing a different but similar character in 9 to 5, and you and I were like, well, let's, talk about maybe another Jane Fonda movie. China Syndrome came up. Apparently, it's a favorite of one Richard Hatem. So, Susan, I want you to tell me a little bit about your first time watching China Syndrome and revisiting it for the Culture Cast.
Well, I do remember watching the China Syndrome when it came out, and I would have been fairly young. I'm going to say 1979, I would have been around 12 or 13. So went and saw it in a movie theater like you used to. And I loved it. I thought it was riveting, thrilling. I was everybody was following nuclear power stories at the time because it was this both idea that we could, it could be the power of the future and absolutely horrifying and going to kill us all, right? So it held both in its precious hands. And I probably because of this movie, became pretty anti-nuclear because I felt it was not safe ultimately. And again, I think there can be safety, but the problem is you always have capitalism in there to muck some things up.
Well, yeah. Well, yes to all of that. Also, what's interesting about this movie is that right before it came out was this thing called 3 Mile Island.
Actually, it came out before 3 Mile Island.
It came out before 3 Mile Island.
It came out before 12 days before it happened. Essentially similar to what happens in the movie, actually.
Yes. Okay. So thank you. That is correct. But the next thing I was going to say sort of still makes sense in that when the movie came out, and it was there were stars in it and people were aware of, nuclear energy, but because of 3 Mile Island, that movie took off in a way that it was not expected to take off because it was suddenly coincidentally so on everyone's mind and in the news. And back then, even a movie that wasn't a huge success, you could expect it to be in theaters for a few months. And so if the expectation was that this movie would be around for only a month or so, it was around a lot longer and made a lot more money and it was on everyone. I mean, it was like, watch the news reports, see the movie, and these were unfolding in real time. And speaking of things unfolding in real time, and we'll get there, but my God, this movie is like a time capsule of how much slower life moved. Even when we're dealing with a movie that is sort of predicated on a ticking clock in a lot of different portions of the film, this movie could not exist today. So much of what's going on in this movie is about waiting. And they get a lot of suspense out of it, But I imagine it's weird for people who weren't alive in the 70s to watch this and go, why are they waiting so much?
Well, and that's why I'm excited. Chris, had you seen this before? Had you heard of it?
So what's really weird, and I've been trying to figure this out since I watched it, must have watched this at some point. I don't remember when, and I'm not one of those letterboxed people. I will never do that. I don't have the compunction to constantly inform everyone of the movies that I watch and my opinions on them outside of this. I feel like this is more than enough. So that being said, I don't keep track on Letterboxd, but there were parts of this movie that seemed very familiar and I couldn't figure out why. So I know I have watched it sometime before 2011. I watched it. So okay. I had seen it, but I will say I've also seen essentially the China Syndrome 2, aka Craig Mazin's Chernobyl series that was on HBO, which is effectively I don't want to say a better version of this, but it is better only because it's like, 6 episodes. It's a TV show. It gives the time and energy to do more, but that's unfair to compare TV and movies. But I have seen Chernobyl, obviously. And if you've never seen Chernobyl, I'm not going to spoil it as if there's anything to fucking spoil with a real life incident, unlike this movie, which we will be spoiling. But I had seen this a long time ago at this point. But I am one of those people that is, I don't know, I'm Ukrainian, so that probably factors into why I give a shit about so much about Chernobyl. But this kind of stuff is
every 5 minutes with the I'm Ukrainian.
I haven't brought that up since March.
I mean, we are talking about
I haven't brought it up since March, as they would say. But I had seen this. I just didn't remember it. Also a huge fan of Jack Lemmon, stemming from primarily his role as Shelley the Machine Levine in one of my favorite movies, Glengarry Glen Ross. So, yeah. I had seen this. I just didn't remember. Only thing I remembered was the climax when he's locked in the room at the end. For whatever reason, that triggered a memory of me remember watching it. I just can't tell you when, like 10 years plus ago.
Well, and that was also my, because it had been a while since I'd watched it, and I had forgotten how much time was spent outside the nuclear power plant, which I sort of remember the whole thing feeling a little bit like a play, like it was so you're trapped right in the nuclear power plant, which is not true. It's half the movie is out of the nuclear power plant. So that was interesting to go, oh wait, no, a whole bunch of stuff happens outside.
Oh yeah, a lot of stuff happens, but that's my memory too. I have not seen the movie since the 70s, or maybe 79 or 80. Here's the thing, here's what triggered it with me. I didn't see it in a theater. I saw it on TV, this thing called On TV. It was the earliest cable available to us. And I think my family got it in 78, 79.
Because Richard Haddam's family had the money and they were in California with all the cable and the on demand.
They were soon to be irradiated outside of Ventana, is what you're telling me.
Yeah.
Richard lived the China Syndrome in real life.
Well, okay, first of all, there is no city of Ventana. There is.
It sounds fake, though. It sounds fake enough to be real. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, it does, because I think it's based on Ventura.
I
think the idea is that it's north, and that's sort of what it looked like. It's like, okay, that looks like kind of a green area north of LA. There is a nuclear power plant about an hour or so south of LA, right on the coast, called San Onofre. It's right near Camp Pendleton, the Army base, and I think it's south of San Clemente. So I remember my brother did a report on nuclear energy when he was in 7th grade, which would have put it maybe a year or two before this movie. And we all drove down there, and he got a tour. And James Hampton, the actor from the movie, gave him the tour just like he does for James.
I really, for a second, thought you were for real. And I know you.
And there was Wilford Brimley at the controls too. It was weird. It was just like the movie.
Now here's your hard hat. One size fits all. And why don't you come this way? And I'm going to show you the gantry crane that comes over, and it can lift things away hundreds of tons. That's my James Hampton.
Pretty good. Oddly specific impersonation.
Well, he's in one of my favorite episodes of the Rockford Files, the Aaron Ironwood School of Success. So whenever I see him, I just think of that Rockford Files episode.
All right. If you're playing the Richard Hatem says Rockford Files on every podcast game, now is the time to drink.
To be fair, Richard doesn't always mention Rockford Files. Sometimes it's Kolchak. It actually hasn't been Kolchak for some time now.
It's one or the other.
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, if I mention Kolchak on the Kolchak podcast, that's okay. You don't get to drink because that's a gimme.
That's fair.
So, well, if I'd known that was the game we were playing, I would have had something other than Diet.
I didn't know it was a game to begin with, but thinking back on all the times I've had you on, Rockford Files come up quite often.
You can play the drinking game with whatever liquid you would like to.
But now that we're on it, I do want to talk about On TV because I just want to see if anyone listening remembers this and can, send out a tweet or an email to you because it was like late 70s and this was a box that they had to come and install and then it was hooked to the back of the TV. So you would turn your television to channel 3, which was not an occupied station in Los Angeles. And then once you did that, you'd have a blank screen. And then you would turn this dial on the On TV box. And it was so funny. It was just a dial that just went this way and that way. It just boom. Okay, now you're getting cable. And then the On TV symbol would come up. And then you would watch whatever was playing. And they would send you a little magazine every month. And it would just say, okay, at 8:00, we're going to show China Syndrome. At 10 o'clock, we're going to show Hardcore, starring George C. Scott. And then if it was a Friday,
turn it up. There you go. That's an oddly specific impersonation just for you.
Thank you. Just like my James Hampton. And then if it was a Friday or a Saturday, there'd be a midnight movie. But that was it. Like it at noon, there was nothing being broadcast. So you would look at this little calendar. And each night at 8:00, they would show a different movie, or sometimes it wasn't that different. They only had access to a few movies. This was early days, and it's crazy, but it's just like, okay, on cable tonight, instead of watching network TV, we can actually watch a movie that was in theaters like 6 months ago. And you would do that. And I think that's where I first saw China Syndrome.
Sounds like really terrible HBO.
Yeah, it was pre-HBO.
Yeah.
It was before HBO.
It was before HBO? Because HBO has weirdly been around a long time.
Well, this was its own thing. Like we didn't have access to that until, again, maybe 1980 when I started high school. And then suddenly it's like, oh, cable TV is now available in the area. And you have multiple channels, including MTV when it premiered. And not only that, but you could get local stations. Like before I went to school in the morning, I could turn on WGN and watch Bozo the Clown, which was being broadcast at like 8 a.m. Chicago time. And I was watching it at 6 a.m. And it was the scariest thing. It was like getting a broadcast from outer space because it was Krusty the Clown. It was this guy going, "Hi, kids, I'm Bozo. And come on down, kids. Let's have." And I couldn't believe what the fuck I was seeing. I was scared out of my mind. I'm like, is this what Chicago's all about?
That gave you the Bozo syndrome, as they call it.
I had the Bozo syndrome.
I can only imagine watching this movie in 79 and just being scared shitless. Like, yes. And again, the nuclear industry after this movie came out said something to the effect, "This is a character hit piece." Really? No shit. Congratulations. Yeah, yes. it is. But
yeah. It didn't help their argument when 3 Mile Island.
Right. Well, yeah. This is a character hit piece. 12 days later, you may have had some good points.
Well, that's the interesting thing. I mean, I'm curious, like, if the earliest reviews were like, well, this isn't a movie, it's propaganda. I mean, it is.
Most people reviewing it were very positive.
Well, because here's the thing. The crazy thing about this movie, and this is what struck me watching it. I mean, there's so many things that struck me. I really enjoyed watching it again. It had been a while. Rich, I think you and I watched it in the last 20 years, because I think we watched it with Owen and Spencer at some point when they were like, around Dashiell's like when Dasher was born, that we watched it. I have a memory of that because us going like, oh my God, I forgot how cool, how great everybody was in this movie. But that this movie is just such it's in some ways, it's kind of a hot mess. It shouldn't work because it's like different styles of movies. It's like a star vehicle. It's a power structure indictment. It's like Network. It's a political thriller. It's a bit of a horror movie. Like there's that horror feeling I had, and then it turns into a hostage movie.
And then there's some cinema verite thrown in there just for good measure. Like it's very all over the place.
Yeah, but at the same time, and I think that the stillness, the waiting, the time, I think that's part of building. That's literally what's used to build suspense. It's stunning to me how many shots there are of just a piece of equipment, just a still shot of a piece of equipment, and you're waiting, and something's going to go wrong with that equipment. Like, it's so weird.
Yes, but the equipment you're looking at, there is not one computer screen in the movie. All the equipment they're looking at are dials and gauges.
It's like Apollo 13 in a lot of ways. Like it's just don't stir the tanks, don't stir the fucking tanks. It's the same thing. Right. It's the same. Yeah. And tap on the fucking thing a couple times, Jack Lemmon. Come on, man, just tap on the fucking thing.
Tapping on the glass that covers the dial, or whatever. It unfortunately now, of course, in retrospect, it reminds you of Homer Simpson's job. It all seems like, what? There's just a bunch of kind of dudes hanging out in a control room, and the only thing that looks computery at all is the dot matrix printer that is popping out information telling you, event started at 21:03, event ended 21:11 or something, and it's telling you, okay, that's when the alarms started and when the alarms stopped. And that's as computery as it gets. Otherwise, this movie is totally analog, not only for the nuclear power plant, but also for the news industry.
The news. Oh my God. It was like what? It was like pre-broadcast news, broadcast news, right? Like, there's a little bit of a love triangle going on. Like there's a female lead reporter who is trying to be taken seriously, who's brilliant in her own way, but also knows she has to do certain things to be on camera in television news. But instead of like racing to get the videotape plugged into the video machine on time, you are literally having to process raw film and get it on the air by 6 o'clock. That was just shot. That is such a time capsule of what 60s and 70s news was.
Well, now, Susan, I don't know that, you say that, but you don't have any personal experience with that. You have nothing to back that up.
I do.
What?
Because I know, because my dad was in television news in the 60s and 70s. He was a cameraman. He was basically Michael Douglas.
He was Michael Douglas.
He was Michael Douglas, but he also did do editing and processing. So when you were the cameraman, there were a couple of times it got separated off for the time, but he would talk about telling stories about, basically trying to. It was all a game, right? You shot your footage. Everybody, the three local news stations were all shooting, oh my God, the car wreck or the march or the demonstration. This is the South in the 60s. So, lots going on. And civil rights, KKK, whatever. And then you shoot that. And then literally everybody then jumped in their big old 60s cars and drove back to their station to get the film in. And then you were trying to get it processed in time to get on the 6 o'clock news, because if you were able to get it processed and then edited so that you could feed it out in time, then you scooped the other people that might have to go, oh, we're going to have film at 11, which meant you didn't make the cut.
Right.
You didn't get it done in time. And so one of my dad's famous stories would be like, they were all sitting around waiting. This guy was threatening to jump. And finally, one of the news guys was like, if you're going to do it, you got to do it now, buddy.
It's like 5 o'clock. We need time to edit the footage of you jumping if you're gonna fucking jump, man.
Otherwise, just climb on down.
Yeah.
Right. If you were hoping for publicity, you got about 5 minutes.
Shit or get off the pot.
Shit or get off the ledge.
What's interesting about this movie, Susan, and you mentioned it, is I would actually contend 9 times out of 10, this movie, 10 times out of 10, this movie should not have worked. Because in a lot of ways, it does feel really disjointed overall. You have the stuff with Jane Fonda and Michael Douglas and Jack Lemmon at the beginning, and then we don't revisit that until right at the end of the movie, which ends up taking up, half of the third act. But everything in between that, I'm not saying it's bad, but it's varying degrees of other genres and other things and other kinds of movies. There's like a Manchurian Candidate conspiracy theory thing going on where there's like the powers that be are trying to stop the information from getting out. So you have the Michael Douglas character and his cameraman, and the cameraman gets run off the road and they're chasing after him. Right. And then you have the in the newsroom stuff, which is reminiscent of, like we've kind of gone on about, real life versus, and also kind of being played up. And then we also have Jack Lemmon going out and doing investigative stuff. And it's like none of those things really hang together. But in this case, they do. And I think it's primarily because the 3 leads are so good. If it were anybody else, I'm not sure this movie would work very well.
Well, I agree with what you're saying. And I think that it also hangs together tonally, because even though we're following sort of, backstage drama and backstabbing at a news network, big power companies, sort of, billionaires trying to manipulate information so that they can, line their pockets. And then the dangers of, a nuclear disaster. The thing that links them all is the word that describes the 70s, which is cynicism. This is a movie about cynicism and where everyone falls on a spectrum of it. And the sort of the needle that we're watching is Jack Lemmon, where he goes from the beginning of the movie and where he arrives at the end of the movie, and his journey as a guy who can go either way. He can either buy into, okay, certain lies have to be told to keep the nuclear power plant running, even if it doesn't make it the safest enterprise in the world. And then when you add on to that the fact that, California power companies want to build another power plant in Northern California. And if bad news comes out about the one in Southern California, we're going to lose a lot of money that we've already invested in opening the one in Northern California. So it's almost, now it's Jaws, it's like, hey, we got a lot of people coming into town.
We got to open that beach. Get that machine working.
Shut up about that shark. I mean, not shark. I mean, nuclear power.
Well, and that's the thing about this movie that, again, it's interesting. They don't really go into a lot as to what is going on at the nuclear power plant. They don't tell you. There's not the scene that would be in the movie now where it's like, if this isn't solved in X amount of time, or if this happens, XYZ will happen. They essentially go, well, if it goes sideways, California's irradiated. That's it. There's none of that. Like you have to just kind of fill in with your own mind what happens if the nuclear power plant goes sideways. They say, it'll melt to China, which obviously not what happens, but the hyperbole is meant to be understood that way. It's hyperbolic for a reason. We can't stop it if anything happens. And if you look at what happened in fucking Chernobyl, where we're essentially just waiting to fix it again now, if something like that were to happen worse, there would be worse consequences than we just have to build a bigger coffin to house it in, which is essentially what keeps happening with Chernobyl every 10 to 20 years now, is they're just going to have to build a bigger coffin outside of it to hold it. Yeah, I mean, nuclear power, folks, it's fun.
So for those of you keeping track at home, the phrase China syndrome is uttered in the movie it couldn't be any closer to the halfway point.
It is an hour and 1 minute. I stopped and wrote it down.
Okay, so Susan and I are those kind of people. It's like when they say China syndrome, pop, and then you look at where the little line is, and it's like, oh, it looks like halfway. Then you look and it's like, oh, the movie is 2 hours and 2 minutes, and it's now 1 hour and 1 minute, and they say China syndrome. And the funny thing is, they describe what the China syndrome is. And then they say, of course, that would never happen. It'll just melt down to the water table. And then radioactive steam will blast up into the atmosphere and kill everybody in Southern California. So don't worry.
Don't worry. It's fine.
That's fine. Not going to melt to China. It's not going to melt to China.
It's just gonna hit the water, create radioactive steam, and then then that's it. So don't worry about it. They don't explain a ton. They give you just enough to understand, oh, well, okay, there's water that has to cool the core. And then if something goes wrong with that, then that's the problem. Okay, it becomes superheated. But there's no real way to understand it. Like, I didn't have any visual understanding of what was happening or what was about to happen or why it was happening. But my God, is it scary. The first 15 minutes of the movie is when the scare happens. Like, okay, we came all the way up to the brink. It's like the feeling you get in war games and this feeling was prevalent in the 70s in the Cold War, when there was this feeling of events will somehow be triggered and then everyone's going to be put on nuclear alert and all these protocols are going to be, passed. And suddenly it's like people are going to be looking at each other like, is this it? I mean, are we turning the keys? Are we punching in the codes? Are we doing this? And there was always this feeling that we were just like weirdly seconds away from a thing happening from which there would be no coming back.
There's no thing after the thing. There's very little good things happen after the thing happens.
Well, and again, it's all predicated on, okay, there's this event that happens that brings us to the breach, and then we are relying on dudes in a bunker somewhere to be following protocol and not be like scratching their asses. I mean, I don't know if I can say that on your podcast.
You can say whatever you like on this show.
Oh, you can say a lot more than that. I've been here.
This is an explicit show for adults only.
I think we also have to, like, I think the somewhat triggering incident for the United States, it was the Cold War, it was, nuclear annihilation after World War II, but really the Cuban Missile Crisis is where I think the beginning of this, like, holy crap, if somebody makes one wrong decision, this whole thing goes south really fast and in a way that you can't back away from.
Right.
And we have that now, we've just sort of forgotten it.
Well, and I feel like even now,
fine. Well, it's fine with all those nuclear warheads. It's fine.
That's the
thing.
Don't
know what they are.
The issue also stems from the fact that now more than ever, and I mean tomorrow more than today or the day after that, every day we are creating new kinds of technology, we're effectively always finding new ways to destroy ourselves, is what it feels like in a lot of ways. And nuclear energy is harnessing the power of explosive nuclear energy for good. But there is always that, but what happens if it goes bad? And it's right. Like, what happens if it goes bad? Does that justify the benefits, right? That's essentially what this movie's asking. Right. That's the nuclear question is, does a nuclear reactor melting down justify having 10% of your energy, created by nuclear energy? And not a question that I can answer because I'm not an expert. I can only go off of what I've seen and read, and everybody's opinion is going to be different. But this movie is based on real events that happened before the movie came out in Chicago, where in Illinois at the Dresden 2 reactor, where this identical thing happened, where it was literally a fucking piece of instrumentation not working, which is horrifying. Because if you're a private pilot and you've ever been in an airplane and you're sitting there and all of a sudden the meters start freaking out, that's essentially what they're dealing with here, except on a bigger scale. But tapping the instruments is a way of fixing things. If you think the instruments are malfunctioning, it's crazy in this movie to see, similarly to something like Apollo 13, the seemingly primitive technology that was being relied on at the time. That's more horrifying now, more than anything else for me. More than what could have happened because something worse did happen. It's seeing the technology that was being relied on at the time for something this catastrophic. Like, what they were preventing it with was, just some fucking lights and dials on a on a screen somewhere. Like,
all
good,
right, open
great.
the valve, close the valve.
Yeah.
Open the valve,
Right.
close the valve.
Put water in, put water out. Like, more water out means it could overheat and, explode. Cool, great. What the fuck?
It is pretty strange, but it did bring back those feelings. And when entertainment was different then, movies were different. You didn't have a ton of movies that were super news topical because you couldn't, because it took too long to make a movie. All the President's Men, yeah, you could do that. It gets referenced in this movie, but it still was, after Watergate was sort of done, that movie came out. This one felt super topical, obviously, and yet it had all of these different things going on. And I think you had to, because at a certain point, I guess you couldn't just have a movie. Well, maybe you could if you played it in real time. And it's like, okay, this is going to be a 2-hour chunk of time where something goes wrong in a nuclear power plant, and it's going to take 2 hours before you realize everything's going to be okay. That's quite a challenge for a filmmaker to maintain that tension for 2 hours based on one thing. But what was interesting was, it's like, well, let's also make it about, is the American news industry willing to go to the mat to expose the dangers, and have they been honest with us? We don't know. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't. So that's fear upon fear. And then you think, well, we all agree that we don't want to, die from being radiated. And then you realize that, no, there are billionaires in this movie who are like, we don't care, because I probably won't be the one dying, which of course makes it feel very
from here.
topical. Yeah, I live far. I don't live in the blast zone.
What do they say?
So,
what's that term? NIMBY. Not in my backyard. I learned that shit in high school, man. NIMBY. Not in my backyard. I mean, that was
so funny.
That was the whole argument with nuclear power plants in the 70s and 60s, was like, not anywhere near me. Like, okay, so we'll put it on an island in Pennsylvania. Okay.
Well, and I think that's one of the, like, so the one that's right near, that's between Los Angeles and San Diego, but you talked about San Onofre. There's a lot of discussion about that place all the time. It's fairly old. It's like, I think from the 60s, late 60s.
Most of them are, right?
And B, you're like, dude, you built a nuclear power plant in the land of earthquakes on the edge of the ocean between two major metropolitan areas, like two of the biggest
people in LA need to run stuff, world. Susan. They need to run things now.
and it's right next to one of the biggest military bases in the United States, Camp Pendleton.
Right.
So you're like, what are you doing?
It's basically it's our Fukushima. It's it did. So it's happened in Chernobyl, and then Fukushima was compromised by a weather event. It wasn't compromised because someone did something wrong or didn't check a dial. There was a tsunami that affected a country that has been affected by earthquakes and tsunamis many times in the past. And it was not able to withstand the force of that. And there have been, we don't hear about it, but, because, unless you're traveling back and forth to Japan, but I know people who make those travels. And I know other people who are like, you're going to Japan, don't eat the fish. And really still don't. And that's years later. So all of this stuff, again, is still a current issue, even though it doesn't feel like it. All that nuclear stuff we were so afraid of is still every bit, including nuclear war, still every bit as much a danger. We just don't think about it anymore because it's not two superpowers. It's not just two guns pointing at each other. Now we've got 13 guns pointing in all directions, and somehow that makes us not think about it as much.
Well, it's like, we're all tired of the pandemic, so we'll just say it's an endemic now and not worry about it. It's fine.
We have a very short attention span. And again, the thing is, even with something like, Chernobyl came out, want to say 2018, 2019. So it's been a couple years. There was a whole thing when Chernobyl came out and people were all back into Chernobyl and researching that and having conversations about it. And I don't know why the conversations have stopped, because to both of your points, the nuclear destruction by weapons aside, the need for energy, the innate human need for energy is what drives these kinds of technological advances like nuclear energy, trying to find a cleaner way to make energy, which we all are in agreement with. We would all like clean energy to exist. But at what point do you make a decision that this is a bad idea? Again, not an expert, so I don't know. But when you see stuff like this, where in the first 15 minutes, you have people essentially making a decision for the lives of millions of people, it's hard to justify in my mind. But at the same time, I'm not looking to find the newest and latest clean energy fix either. So I'm just a movie podcaster, I just talk about Jack Lemmon saying funny things and being good at acting,
it's fine, Chris. No one's looking at.
No one wants my opinion anyways.
Yeah, I do. But I know we went straight political and straight examination, but it was so fun to watch all these actors and Jack Lemmon. I mean, he's so good at just reacting. Like the first 15 minutes are so great because of him, because he's sitting there going, I'm so in trouble, like the little biting his thumb and
those close-up shots of him are amazing. God,
I'm like, I'll watch it. Like, again, I don't even need him to read the phone book. I just need him to out loud. I just need him to look at it. Right. Like, and I'll watch it.
I could listen to that guy look at the phone book all day.
But it is, and like you said, like Michael Douglas is not the star of this film. No. He's in fact arguably the bad guy. Like, because I was like, okay, I was trying to remember, because if we're going to look at it from this perspective, and one of the reasons I think Richard and I both stopped at when they said China Syndrome was because we're both a little bit of structure hounds. Like, how did they structure this film? And it's so weirdly structured because there's a lot of beginnings to the film, right? There's the you could argue the inciting incident is the earthquake, right? Or you could argue it's the shudder, right, that comes after the earthquake that everybody thinks is just after the earthquake. And or you could argue that it's Michael Douglas filming, or you could argue that it's Michael Douglas stealing the film, or you could.
Okay, but I have a question. They never say the word earthquake in this movie. Was there an earthquake?
Oh, it was. I thought it was just the. Okay, tell me if my interpretation is wrong, because I want to answer the question that you had at the beginning, Richard. So what happens is the reason all of this is happening is because the welds on the equipment were not checked correctly, and so they weren't tested correctly. And today, the day that the movie happens, couple days that the movie happens, today just happens to be the day the welds start failing. And the welds are starting to fail and come apart, causing the vibration to happen, because there shouldn't be any vibration. But to be fair, in my mind, that's not answered until like the last 10 minutes of the movie, where Jack Lemmon is on the ground dying and he's like, I can feel it again. So it's not explained until the very end. But at the same time, like, it's in California, so the fact that they didn't lean on that, I guess they didn't want to lean on that because they wanted it to be human oversight failing. Because again, Jack Lemmon mentioned several times, he's like, there's checks to the checks to the checks to the checks. There's 4 checks here, and they can't all fail. And it's like, well,
if somebody didn't,
Jack, Jack, they did fail.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's just get this clear plot wise. So after the initial investigation of, so we had an incident yesterday. Let's, we have to do our due diligence. What happened? They talked to each of the people who were in the control room. And then afterwards, Jack Lemmon is going through what looks almost like a seismograph.
I think that's maybe why I thought it was earthquake.
Right. And he's talking to Wilford Brimley, who apparently was questioned at much greater length. And he sort of feels like he's going to be made to take the fall for, the fact that something even sort of happened. But that's when Jack Lemmon first says, no, I know what that is. And I know what that is. I'm talking about this vibration over here. It's like, what was that? And Wilford Brimley's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to have a cup of coffee. I don't want to look into this any further because my ass is on the line. Okay, then that connects to a moment toward the middle of the film where Jack Lemmon puts on a hazmat suit and takes a Geiger counter and goes down to like into the belly of the beast, into the works of the reactor, and gets some disturbing readings, and then basically just visually says, look, I can visually see that there's like dust and water coming out, like
leaking out. It's leaking out from the weld.
So there's been movement that should not be happening. Therefore, I then go and check some x-rays because I know they checked for metal fatigue. But now I see that on these two different inspection dates, months apart, it's just the same photo. They didn't actually go and recheck.
No, it's worse than that. All of the welds were just the same thing. Every photo that he submitted is just the same photo okay, fine. What I think the problem that I ultimately do have with this movie is everything had to go wrong in this movie to prove a point. In reality, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, it's a lot of things going wrong. I know. Ultimate worst scenario, but
all right. And you know me, I'm sure Susan's thinking along the same lines, because it's like, okay, so like if we were writing this, where would they be giving us notes? But then I'm like, in retrospect, and just in this conversation, I'm realizing, okay, so it leads him to then physically check for. It's like, okay, I've already had the scene with Jane Fonda, where I tell her there's a check upon a check upon a check upon a check. So now he's checking on those checks and realizes, oh, no, we didn't do our homework and our due diligence. Someone it's a submit the same information, but don't actually physically check the actual physical equipment. So I think that is what's causing the problem. And that's why we didn't catch it sooner. And now I have to let people know about it. But it was in the process of me trying to let people know about it that I showed my hand in a very obvious way to someone I probably shouldn't have shown it to, by saying, look, someone is faking the test results and saying everything is safe, when in fact they have not actually checked the physical equipment to make sure it is safe. And that guy basically says, it's fine. Don't worry about it. We're building another one. We can't bring this up now. Just give it some time. And he's like, there is no time. And that's actually what accelerates the events in the second half of the movie, because then that guy realizes, okay, we got a problem. And then literally it almost becomes Silkwood. It's like, are they going to just go kill Jack Lemmon?
Well, because they go and kill the other, because they try to kill
Hector.
Hector, thank you, who is so great. I like that actor, Daniel Valdez. Valdez. Yes.
Yeah.
He actually is a big part of he was part of Zoot Suit, I think. The Zoot Suit.
Yeah, he also directed La Bamba. The Lou Diamond Phillips movie.
Actor?
Yeah.
That actor did? Oh, I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
And they try to kill him, like, because he's got these photos. What does he have?
He's got those photos. He's got the photos that because Jack Lemmon, it's like, so the x-rays, the fake, the x-rays that are dated but not updated. So that guy has those. So basically employees or someone in the employ of the California Power Commission runs him off the road and tries to kill him because he's going to show up at a public hearing with this evidence. Meanwhile, there's a car parked outside Jack Lemmon's condo in Thousand Oaks or wherever he's living. And those guys are following him, and you totally get the feeling that they're going to try to kill him. And it's like, what the fuck? Like
millions of dollars are at stake. Millions upon billions of dollars are at stake. Well, and then you have Richard Hurd, who plays the kind of, I guess, the ultimate villain of the movie, the kind of the shadowy businessman who shows up and he, just very matter of factly is like, just fucking stop this, end this, fix the problem, whatever it takes. What does it take? It takes Jack Lemmon getting shot in the back twice, which is, so fine.
But again, for the nuclear power story, and I would argue the real spine of the movie, the heart of the movie, is Jack Lemmon's story of a guy who has been working at this power plant, it sounds like, for decades somehow. And it's almost like the the riverboat captain. It's like, this is my ship. I love this ship. I have a personal connection to it, and I have a stake in the integrity of its operation and its reputation. And I just took for granted that everything was okay. But now when I doubled back and looked, I realized this thing that I have been connected to so emotionally is rotten to the core. I'm discovering that this institution that I'm a part of may not be as pure as I am as an individual. And what am I going to do about it? And it's in making that decision that he literally risks his life. And then in the events of the movie goes down and in a very daring move has to really, really ring the bell.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know, we can do spoilers because we've spoiled everything else.
This movie's been out since 1979. We're far past statute of limitations on spoilers.
He literally walks behind the security guard and just takes his gun, and then suddenly is like, in order to save you and the world, I am going to take charge of this nuclear power plant in order to make you understand what's at stake. And that's such an interesting thing. But everything that you just described, Rich, is so like kind of some of the best movies of the 70s, right? It's Network. I'm part of this thing that is at its core rotten, and I've suddenly realized it, and I'm going to start trying to yell about it. And, the Manchurian Candidate, which might be more 60s, I guess, but like it's that weird, like, it's the cynicism, but it's also it's I'm cynical. Oh, now I'm going to try to do something about it. And it's really too late, quite honestly.
Yeah.
So
it's often like how much your cynicism is like, it's always a character who has to be pushed to essentially nuclear. In this movie, it's nuclear disaster. But in a lot of these movies, there's always the inciting incident has to be the cusp of whatever it is you're going to see either in most of these movies happen at the end. Because if it's me writing this movie, I have the fucking place go nuclear at the end just to prove the point as the filmmaker. I agree with you because it's not clear. And then suddenly you're like, oh, wait, was this noted? Did they not let them do this? That's my question. I'm genuinely curious if they were like, you can't end it that way, right?
Well, yes, because look at it this way: if you recalibrate what you think the movie's about just a couple of degrees, look, if the movie is about our point is scaring the shit out of the viewer and telling them it's gonna happen, then we do it that way, where we actually have the event happen at the end of the movie, and it's like, oh shit, and you walk out. Or if you tilt it this way and go, well, no, we're going to use that threat as a way to talk about what is the thing that everyone talked about in the 70s, which is, what are you going to do once you find out things are rotten? What happened to the people who spoke out about the Vietnam War? What happened to, it's like, what about those two reporters who broke open the story of Watergate and how much were they risking? What about that guy in Las Vegas who realized he really is a vampire? What did that reporter do? He fought to tell the truth, and his name was Carl Kolchak. Now you may take a
twice on this show.
That was a reach. I don't even know that that's allowed, but whatever.
That's all about reporters. It's all about reporters. Carl Kolchak, the greatest fictional reporter of all time. So they decided to make it about Jack Lemmon's decision, because the question isn't so much, it's like the movie is not going to shut down nuclear power plants, but let's take a larger theme about personal integrity and putting yourself at risk for a greater cause. It's like and he sacrifices himself. I mean, he literally sacrifices himself to get a message out to the world. And that message is, this isn't as safe as you think it is. And we're not just talking about nuclear power. We're talking about it's not safe because the mechanism has to be administered by human beings, and human beings' motives are always in question.
But there's a whole other layer to this movie that is basically about capitalism.
Yeah.
And that human beings in relation to capitalism and in relation, and that's the bigger story that this movie is about, because it's not just, basically looking at, and making a political point about nuclear power. It's making a political point about news. It's so upsetting the way this movie ends, where they've just had this incident where someone gave their life in order to try to stop a nuclear incident or an unsafe power plant from continuing to operate unsafely. They are killed for it. Everyone is affected by it on the scene. Should be the biggest news of the day. And they cut away from that news report for a commercial about microwaves. And they play, the last shot is playing the camera that's still running the live feed from the outside the nuclear power plant and the commercial side by side at the end.
It's so great.
It's so great, and it's so disturbing, and it's so horrific, right?
Well, it also speaks to our attention span as humans.
But it also speaks
out of sight, out of mind.
Both the nuclear power, the inciting incidents for both the nuclear power plant and the television news is that capitalism trumps both of them. That the dollar, for the people who are making the dollar, trumps the safety of millions of people, and the dollar trumps this letting people know that their safety is at risk and that what is really happening is trumped by cutting to commercial, is trumped by someone having to make some money. A millionaire, a billionaire having to make a little more money trumps everything else.
Why do you keep saying Trump?
Right.
I didn't even mean to.
Oops, like oops a million times. It's funny. The studio refused. The studio started pulling this movie from theaters after 3 Mile Island.
Did they really?
Which is crazy.
But they didn't want to be seen as taking advantage of a catastrophe. But at the same time, I would contend no better time than when these things are going on to inform people. Again, it is a narrative, so there is a lot of creative elements to it that aren't real, but what they're talking about in the movie with the nuclear incident that's taking place is very real. Even if Jane Fonda and Michael Douglas and Jack Lemmon are all playing characters, doesn't matter. What they're talking about and what's happening is real. And I get why they pulled it, but at the same time, it kind of speaks to what you're talking about, Susan, which is, maybe we don't want to talk about this. Like, maybe never mind. It's like, no. This is the time now to have this conversation. It really is.
And what's so interesting, and I'd only noticed it when the credits ran on silence, there's no soundtrack to this movie. There's no music in this
musical
movie.
Score.
There's no musical score. There's an audio soundtrack, and it's, I think, really quite brilliant. I don't know if it was nominated for, sound design, but it's incredibly brilliant when you realize that they made a thriller movie with no music.
Right.
There's no music in it. And they're running those credits, just white credits on a black screen, which was so powerful in the 70s. I like that's all I want in my movies.
What else is there to say? It's like, and there you go. And put a pin in
it. There's no sound. It's really powerful.
Yeah, you can just imagine people walking out of the theater just like, oh God. I mean, and the fact
and also going, wait, they killed Jack Lemmon. You killed Jack Lemmon.
Yeah, I think that was a big surprising thing. I think people were like, oh, so he's really dead. Like, oh, the star of the movie, and not only that, but a very recognizable, beloved star just gets killed. So, but the fact that it's the microwave oven commercial is so funny because, again, if you grew up then, the microwave oven was this weird, miraculous, magical new thing that was also scary because I think people thought it was nuclear powered. It's like, what's happening?
It's radiation.
It's irradiating my food. Like, am I going to get cancer from the microwave oven?
Don't stand too close to the microwave oven. I was told
don't watch it as it's cooking your food.
But you want it because everyone's got to have it because now you get your food heated up, in 1 minute instead of 20 minutes. And it's so perfect. It's like, well, but you guys want your microwave. So guess what? You're going to get it. And we're going to sell it to you on the TV news. We're going to run a story about the dangers of nuclear power. And then in the commercial break, we're going to sell you a microwave oven that at that time was eliciting fears that were analogous in a way. We're bringing it into the home. Anyway, that's a really great moment.
And I assume at that time using an awful lot of power to run.
Oh, of course. Yeah, of course.
And again, the context of 1979, which I have been basically kind of studying for the last, 5 years trying to figure out how both we and I got here from my childhood. It's a favorite date of mine, the late 70s and early 80s. And I think it was such a cynical time, a time of great upheaval. Like, not only, like, everything felt like it was falling apart. 3 Mile Island, Skylab, like, this was, the last gasp of the Carter administration, the hostage crisis, the like all that
the energy crisis,
the energy crisis, inflation. It was all happening in 1979. It was what the sky was literally falling in 1979.
Feels like 2022, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, in a lot, we've had this conversation, I think, a couple times now, but there is, in a lot of ways, it feels like the times that we live in now are culturally tumultuous, sure, but also it does feel like the sky is falling, and everybody will go out and say that. But Dan Carlin wrote a book called "The End Is Always Near," and I think everybody always thinks the end is always near. I mean, if you were to watch this movie in '79 and tell people, 30 plus, 40 plus years later, nothing actually has ever happened. Like, no nuclear anything has, like Chernobyl and Fukushima happened, but they didn't happen to the extent that we're talking about in this movie. The scenario that this movie is positing has not happened, thankfully, yet. However, someone may be listening to this in the future and be like, "You fucking idiots, it has happened."
Well, I don't think you can dismiss Chernobyl and Fukushima.
I can't dismiss them, but what happened here, what this movie is talking about is those things happening unabated, which can't happen in and of itself, but obviously.
And then you have to ask, because I'm sure people in the nuclear power industry were up in fucking arms about this movie.
Oh, yeah.
But you have to ask, did the movie help push for further protections? Wasn't it sort of like, well, the cat's out of the bag now, so we now have to, and people who were never questioning us are now questioning us, and the public is looking at us. So you know what? Okay, fine. We'll go and do the actual checks and balances and the extra safety measures. In other words, can we thank this movie for the fact that those things have not happened in America? We're shrugging now.
I don't know. This is an audio media. Well, it's like that television special from the 80s, The Day After, right? That same wasn't that very similar.
I mean, in the early 80s, yeah.
Yeah, but it comes out 4 years after this. I mean, and it's talking about what happens if we destroy ourselves with the nukes, right? As opposed to what happens if this happens on its own, or because people don't give a shit. It's a similar question.
Anecdotally, it is said that Ronald Reagan watched that broadcast along with the rest of America, and it changed his point of view to the degree that he began being more, more open-minded about actually, communicating with the Soviet Union or trying to take steps to avoid nuclear war. Now, whether those steps were hugely effective or right-headed, if you will, because soon after that, it was the Star Wars Defense Initiative. We're going to put laser beams in space, and that's how we're going to solve this. So believe me, I'm not waving a flag for Ronald Reagan, but it is funny how back in the day, reporters were heroes and television was a thing that could actually do something good. And now it's flipped. Now media is a fucking fire hose filled with diarrhea, and we have to look at sane politicians as the heroes, as the people who will go in and go, we're going to grab the stick, from this, nosediving aircraft, and we're going to pull it out of its nosedive and try to save it, because as it turns out, government makes the laws, so government actually can and should be the one to solve the problems. And media is not helping, and people who believe that, government's the problem. Really? Well, who are you going to leave it to? Elon Musk?
Oh, Yes. Well, and that's the thing.
We see how well that melts down.
Well, and that's the thing. That's the other thing about this movie. If this movie were to be made today, there would be a politician aspect to it. And that's not here in this movie. It's not here because it's rather small in scope. And it's kind of the idea of keeping it under wraps until you can't keep it under wraps anymore.
The network executives and the nuclear power plant executives kind of are the face of that.
They're kind of stand-ins, but there would be like a like local politician character in a newer version of this who's like, they're reaching out to like, you need to help us talk to somebody because nobody is listening. And again, you could use that as an opportunity to either have them say, well, I don't know what you're talking about, as they're filing their check from the, Foster's and Sullivan nuclear power company, or they get involved. But it's interesting that there's not that character in this movie. Like you've mentioned, both of you mentioned, it is a rather cynical movie all the way to the end. It believes in the worst of people pretty much throughout, outside of the three main characters. Everybody else is varying shades of terrible. Some of them, almost, Richard Hurd is effectively a mustache twirling villain at the end of the movie. He's like, do whatever it takes. Make my bank account grow. Like, okay,
Yeah. It gets pretty crazy, but Jack Lemmon definitely, dies for his convictions.
Yep.
And in doing so, and again, those actions are precipitated by his total disillusionment in the institution that he works for. Jane Fonda, it's funny, just almost in the last line, that's just sort of a throwaway line at the very end. She is reporting this story and sort of taking the baton from Jack Lemmon's cold, dead hand and carrying it out into the world so that the world knows why he died and what was at stake. And the higher ups at the network who have been telling the pretty redhead to, hey, just do the light, puff pieces and we'll leave the hard news to the men. And you can hear a voice go, wow, she really did a great job. It's like, so you're kind of like, oh, okay. So she took the next step. She did the right thing. Okay. That didn't end her career. It sounds like maybe it will continue her career. So yeah, so they do end those two stories.
I'd like to point out that voice is Peter Donat, who is better known as playing Fox Mulder's father in the X-Files. Every time I see him and William B. Davis and stuff, I'm just like, what? This is what they were doing before they were involved with the aliens. I knew it. But he's great because, like you mentioned, even he gets a turn of character. He's like a secondary character in this movie, a third tier character even. But he gets a little turn at the end where he's like, she did a good job. I don't know, who knows if that extends past that, but
even that's cynical because you feel like he's like, when the beautiful, attractive, redheaded woman is crying, delivering a story, maybe there's a new way to do news.
Right. Maybe we can really make something out of this.
Well, and again, it is also the bookend to the movie, right? The movie, again, starts very brilliantly, I thought, where you basically can't see Jane Fonda because she's prepping herself in a mirror, right? So you can't see her face, you just see her hair, and you hear all these men talking about her and her hair and what she looks like and how she'll do what they tell her to do. And it's freaking creepy. Yeah. And, yes. And what we've been talking about at ADCV most recently, which is about women have to look a certain way and the male gaze on a woman and to at least acknowledge it. But they're both acknowledging the male gaze in this movie, but they're also using it, right? It's like,
so did you say 80s TV Ladies, podcast that
did you not know what Richard was doing here? Richard was trying to be like, wait, what show was that again?
What show was it? 80, yes, my podcast, which we'll shout out later. But it was very funny because one of the reasons we came to this is because I wanted to jump in on 80s or late 70s female-driven TV shows, but also talking with Chris about movies, female-driven movies. This is driven by Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda is the first name up. Jane Fonda is top of the call sheet against friggin' Michael Douglas and Jack Lemmon. And that's pretty amazing I want to point out that she and Michael Douglas produced this movie.
Yeah,
it's Michael Douglas and IPC Films, which is Jane Fonda, and her production company, which produced a documentary about Vietnam with her then husband Tom Hayden in 1974. Introduction to the Enemy, one of the things that got her in a lot of trouble, but oddly enough, never Tom Hayden. He ran through.
Yeah, weird.
Well, she also produced 9 to 5, which we just talked about. Another movie with kind of a point.
Yes. So China Syndrome 1979, 9 to 5 that she produces in 1980. On Golden Pond she produces in 1981. Holy crap. Just there.
Yeah.
She should be like, she starred in those, but she also was very much a part of producing them.
Yeah.
She made those movies happen. They were movies that she wanted to get made. And I don't think she gets enough credit for that. And in fact, I think she probably got slapped for it.
Well, anytime you open your mouth and give your and this is something that's always bothered me personally, and I'm sure it bothers both of y'all because you are more entrenched in the entertainment industry than I am. I don't feel that your job that you do should disqualify you from having an opinion, which I guess is the belief of a lot of people that actors and people who work in the entertainment industry almost exclusively aren't allowed to and should not give their opinion. I understand the sentiment. Most people, aka let's just go with a welder out in Des Moines, Iowa, doesn't have the opportunity to go on any news network and spout their opinion. I get that. None of us do. Twitter exists now, which is essentially a giant asshole brigade of people screaming their opinions all at once and nobody can hear it. That's fine. But I've never understood the sentiment that your job disqualifies you from having an opinion. I get why people don't like it because it's given more amplification because we give people in the entertainment industry, specifically actors and other people, a lot more ground and room to scream their things or room, to step back and let them scream. But it has always bothered me. People are like, well, they're just an actor. Shut their mouth. It's like, why don't you shut your fucking mouth? Like you are. If I work at Tom Thumb or I work at a grocery store checking people out or stocking the shelves, my opinion is no less valid than someone else's. But yet somehow working in the entertainment industry like Jane Fonda did makes you she made herself a target, which is fine. So can't really complain. But at the same time, her opinion is just as valid. And frankly, she has more opportunities and more resources to do more with her opinion, which is, I think, the more important thing. It's less about their opinion and more about doing something about it, doing something with that platform, not just screaming about it.
And that's what I'm saying. I think some would say that, in fact, people who have a platform have a responsibility to speak up passionately about the things that are important to them.
I agree.
Because they can move the needle on things. But I'm going to add sports figures into your
agreed
actors because
it's essentially anybody who's getting paid a lot of money to do something that entertains a lot of people. But your opinion is invalid for whatever fucking reason.
And I think it's because those people are also adored, right? People adore them for one thing that they do.
That's fair.
And when they go, well, but I also believe this, and it goes against what that person who wants to adore them for the one thing, you're like, it's the disappointment. It cuts both ways because you're like, oh no, not that guy. I like that guy.
But there are people that are like, yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's not about, and I know everybody talks about being canceled and cancel culture. It's more about consequences. If you say something like that, just know that there is going to be a column that increases and a column that decreases. And
exactly,
that's just the way it is. Aaron Rodgers said what he said, and some people agreed with him. They know who they are. Other people disagreed with him. They know who they are. Nothing has really changed, but people now know more where you stand and can make decisions based off of it. I don't think anybody's opinion is invalid. It's just when you say something, you shouldn't be surprised if people have a response to that. That's, I think, for me, is the bigger problem. It's like, what do you expect? Yes. People expect, you're expecting a response. Are you upset that you got one?
Hey, I think it's pretty clear. I mean, I've been on the show long enough that anyone listening and anyone who gives a shit, which is probably not a lot, about my political opinions knows that I'm on the left. And so my opinion is, if you're a Nazi and an anti-Semite, by all means, Go on television and talk about
Let us know up front, please.
I want to know, and I want to watch you talk about your beliefs so that we all know exactly what you're about. And then we can respond accordingly. So far from canceling, I want you all to get up and open your stupid mouths and let us know your Nazi opinions.
Wow.
Let's hear them all.
Richard.
Richard, you were on the episode of The Boys, or not The Boys, The Devils, that you and I did together, and that was in sometime June, July, would have been just by or June, so June of 2020, which if you're an American, you remember what was going on in June of 2020 in our country. A massive, once again, reawakening of civil rights and protesting regarding what happened with George Floyd. And you and I, at the beginning of that episode, Richard, talked a little bit about it.
I don't remember that.
Right?
I don't. No, I do remember.
Yeah,
that.
But there were some people who voiced their opinions on Facebook about what we said, and good. Make it known that you don't like what we said, because my opinion's not going to change. Richard's opinion's not going to change.
And there's a lot of podcasts for those people to go listen
exactly.
to.
And that's what I said. I'll say it then. I'll say it now. If you have beliefs that you think don't agree with mine on a base level, please go listen to something else. I don't care if you don't listen to this show one goddamn fucking iota, because I am not an anti-Semite. I'm not a racist any more than Richard or Susan is. But the thing is, like you said, Richard, by all means, let me know if you are, because that makes it easier for me to fucking avoid you. And that, I think,
Yes, and participate in the great American tradition of capitalism. I'll now know who to spend money on and who not to spend money on.
Right.
And isn't that what we all love about America? So let's all speak up, and then you guys can support or not support whoever you like.
And that's what Jane Fonda did. I mean, and that's why, we talked about it on 9 to 5, Susan. We can mention it here. Jane Fonda has chosen throughout her career to put her career on the line for speaking up about things that motivate her. The war in Vietnam, nuclear power, the 9 to 5 movement. Most recently, I think within the last 6 to 8 months, climate change. Put your money where your mouth is, which is effectively for Jane Fonda, her career. She puts her career on the line anytime she does anything, because she runs the risk of alienating more people or building up her image to other people that she's willing to do the hard thing. There are plenty of actors who keep their heads down. It's just a job. They go in, you guys know them. They go in, they work, and they never say fucking anything, like plenty of normal people. But then there are people just like, the three of us in a lot of ways, who want to share our opinion with other people, regardless of what it is. And there have to be both for society to work. I just, I don't think that being an actor or a singer or an athlete discredits your opinion because you make a lot of money. People listen to Elon Musk, and he makes more money than any of the people we're talking about. Maybe he doesn't actually have it, but perception is reality anymore anyway. So,
well, I do want to shout out both. I mean, and at Michael Douglas, basically all three of these actors were clearly putting themselves in this movie for a reason. I mean, Jane Fonda had 2 Academy Awards, I think, at this point already. And so she was both this huge star, arguably one of the biggest female stars of the time, but also continuing to be an activist, but had the privilege of, and I think she's talked about this in later years, about I put myself on the line, but I was also very successful, and I was okay, and I was a white woman, and even though and again, she got really punched for mostly her Vietnam views, and she's like, I think she has said she doesn't regret the views, she regrets one of the incidences where she took a picture basically during the war, basically with the enemy, and it made it. She's like, I wasn't happy that enemy wanted to shoot down American soldiers, but I was trying to say there are people here that are people, right? And I'm against the war in general. But regardless of that, I think it's just interesting to note how often she has put her career on the line. Michael Douglas less so, but definitely I think back in the 70s and 80s was doing that. And so many actors, I think, and so many people were activated in the 60s and 70s to make content that spoke to them and that was political. And I think we have sort of lost that because you might piss off one of, well, we got to get the plant started up again at 3 because that's what the bosses want and the bosses pay are my job. So it's hard to fight that sense that we need to kind of turn away from some of this stuff. And since I have to go back to Richard shouting out, Ronald Reagan, and shout out President Carter, who was president in 1979, who was president during the 3 Mile Island meltdown, and who basically was also very great, managed that emergency and that really scary time very, very well by basically going and touring, very famously, the 3 Mile Island plant and saying, yes, it was this thing that happened. It is under control. The president of the United States is walking through this plant now, and we will fix this, and we recognize this as a problem. And then also beefing up the Environmental Protection Agency so strongly that in the first part of the administration, they couldn't stop the train of the Environmental Agency. Basically, then under Reagan, it was started under Jimmy Carter, but kind of came to fruition under Reagan, where the Environmental Protection Agency started the Superfund, which was to clean up environmental nightmare sites like 3 Mile Island and other kind of basically environmental disasters that were poisoning everyone in the area around them. And those Superfund sites are still cleaning up disasters and are still in a very effective use of government resources, despite being underfunded for many years after Reagan. But yeah.
And by the way, this wasn't a photo op for Carter. Wasn't he an engineer? He knew a little bit about the way a nuclear power plant worked.
He's not an engineer, but he did serve on one of the first nuclear subs, or nuclear ships, maybe not sub, nuclear ships. So he had nuclear training. And in fact, he actually did indeed take part in an incident where American soldiers with nuclear training were sent to Canada, where they were having a nuclear incident. And as the leader of that team, they basically helped Canada solve basically a meltdown that was happening by sort of dismantling pieces of equipment in that core area. I don't know much about nuclear power, but he did. They trained on a tennis court so that they could go in literally 12 seconds at a time. It's like, go in, turn the crank, walk out. Yep. Next guy, go in, turn the crank some more, walk out.
You guys need to watch Chernobyl. It's like, okay, Chernobyl, the TV show, is like the China Syndrome on steroids. Right, it is the best version of the China Syndrome that isn't the China Syndrome. It really is. And
Chris,
yes, don't you understand? I know you don't watch new TV. I know. Especially stuff on HBO. I know.
We just want to watch something funny. Isn't there just a half-hour thing before we fall asleep? I can't watch a long drama at night. It gets me too nervous, too stressed out to sleep.
You don't want to see dudes' skin sloughing off, as they would say?
No.
It's pretty gross stuff. It's crazy to me. It took from 1979 to 1993 to clean up 3 Mile Island. And 3 Mile Island only stopped being in service, working order, 3 years ago is when it shut down.
Yeah, because one of them shut down. And again, it's so weird. I've been reading and studying nuclear. I still don't understand. I understand vaguely, but it's how do you shut down one side but not the other?
Right. Well, there's separate. Yeah. There's 2 to 3 reactors, but one of them shut down because it went meltdown, and the other one didn't, and they were running it until 2019, and it's estimated it took $1 billion to clean up 3 Mile Island, which is a good use of everybody's money and a better use of the time and effort that could have been spent doing literally anything else. But again, it's the movie. The movie doesn't ask the question of what is the trade-off. The movie just says the trade-off is bad. And I can't make that determination for anybody what your feelings on nuclear energy are. But the thing that I appreciate about China Syndrome does it more or less does as good of a job as anything I've seen short of Chernobyl with giving a unbiased look at it. I mean, again, like we've said with Jack Lemmon's character, he's kind of on board up until the moment he isn't. Jane Fonda has no opinion going into this. She's not an activist showing up. She's just a reporter doing her job. I appreciate that the movie, as much as the movie does take a stand against nuclear energy, it does really give the audience an opportunity to come to that conclusion on their own through what they're providing.
Because they have all three, because Michael Douglas is the activist in this piece. He's pretty decided from the get-go.
But it's also not a movie about how, the science just isn't there.
Right.
It's a movie about it works if we assume that people are all good people who are not being driven by greed. But if they are, then corners will be cut, and then we're going to suffer some really shitty consequences. Now, I know we're coming toward the end, so I do want to kind of comment on the most important part of this movie, which is the beginning of the movie, where they do a feature story on a company called Livewire's Singing Telegrams, a company that yours truly worked for beginning in 1983. Right here in Los Angeles.
It's so funny because I was like, we watched the movie separately, so this would be sort of fresh for us, and because I couldn't watch it at the same time Richard had it on because we're so busy. But
your cosmopolitan lifestyles wouldn't have allowed you.
But
to
I
do
was like literally
that.
going, wait, is that literally like that's what I knew? That's what Richard. I didn't realize it was the same name of the company that you worked for.
It's literally a commercial for that company. It was the weirdest thing. And they're doing the little song that I had to learn. Give an H, give an H, give an HAP, give a P, give a P, give a PPY. Literally, happy birthday, hasn't life been grand so far? I mean, it's so funny. In 1983, Larry and I started working there. They got a little commercial at the beginning of the movie. It brought back a lot of memories because that's a real company that really existed, and no, people were into it back then.
I mean, it's just it has a new face now. It's just called Cameo.
No.
Tell me I'm wrong.
That's using real people, though.
You're
that's
right.
Not using
so were Candygrams, right? I mean, Richard had to go to. It's essentially the same thing. It's that bumped up to the next level where it's like instead of just some random person, wouldn't you like it if Kevin from The Office said Happy Birthday? Like, yeah, I guess. Sure.
Well, okay, but and then we're in a different era of celebrity because back then you'd hire people to go in as like classic, Marilyn Monroe,
right?
Humphrey Bogart, Groucho Marx, and people would picture having a party. You're having a party. There's 40 people in your backyard, and then somebody dressed as Groucho Marx, by the way, who no one knows who that is now, walks in and just sort of takes over and starts talking, and everyone's like, "What's happening right now?" And there's some actor who for 15 minutes does a little routine, sings a song, gives a telegram and a giant Hershey's kiss to the, graduate or, birthday person or anniversary couple. And everyone then stops the party for like 10 or 15 minutes. Then everyone claps and that person walks out and now the party has to continue somehow. This was considered the greatest thing ever. It's like if you had that at your party, that made you cool.
Well, it was also the time of conventions where you would also have murder mysteries take place, and a bunch of actors would come in, and there'd be a theme murder mystery happening around you at the dinner party, where Groucho Marx would be solving a crime because there'd be a murder.
Did you dress up as Groucho Marx a lot, Richard? Be honest with us.
Oh,
as a kid, I did. I was a big.
I'm asking
Groucho
if you were
Marx
doing
fan.
Candygrams as Groucho Marx.
I did. I was Mo Howard from the Three Stooges, and my friend Larry was
amazing.
Curly. So we were. Our bit was we were the Two Stooges. We were Mo and Curly, and whoever we were going to the party for, we would train them how to be the third Stooge.
Oh my God!
Hey, listen, and I brush my hair down on my forehead, and it'd be like, "Hey, we hear you're a real Stooge. Well, we're gonna help you join our act." And we do a thing where we would teach them how to do the eye poke and everything. And I mean, it was a whole thing. And I was in high school. I was a high school senior when I started doing this.
I did it till about halfway. I would have rather done what you did.
I did this till about halfway through college or late college. And it was, we would each get $25, but basically they'd be like, okay, you got a job. It's tonight at 6 o'clock. It's in Redondo Beach. So just be there, get in a car, drive, an hour and a half, earn your $25 and keep whatever tips you get, like we ever got tips. And then, and that was our job. And we would do that. And they're like, well, if you're popular, you could be doing 2 or 3 a week. And we're like, you mean we could each be making $75 a week? We'll be millionaires.
Look at you now.
You
own LA's premier candy gram company. Hellos from Haddam.
Done.
Register that fucking thing right now.
I got it. Susan, register that call right now. I'll distract Chris while you call our lawyer.
It is funny though, that just the fact that this movie, the thing that I do appreciate about this movie ultimately is it is a movie with a message that doesn't let the message get in the way of still being entertaining, still having fantastic performances. It's not beating you over the head with its morally righteous high ground. And there are movies that exist just like this one, that's all they do. And that is their entire intent. And I appreciate that this movie can be entertaining and, again, mildly informative.
And so there were a couple things that we missed that I just want to throw out before we wrap up is for a second, there was somewhere in there where it reminded me of Jurassic Park, where I wanted Michael Douglas to say, you were so preoccupied with whether you could, you didn't stop to think you should.
It's when the glass is shaking.
Yeah. And then there's a couple of just really random like character things. And for Jane Fonda, and one, it's also, there's a whole other story going on in here where it's like, it is about her as a woman in this industry. And she's looked at objectively so much. They literally tell her, you're not a reporter, you're a performer. They're like, it's about Michael Douglas, who she has gotten Michael Douglas hired. And at one point he turns around and he slaps her on the butt. Like, come on, kid. And
he does.
Like, she got you hired. And you're pulling that.
I didn't know. I guess my initial interpretation was that they were more than just colleagues, but lead me to believe later in the movie, definitely not, which was very Pat, you don't do that. Like,
and there's something I had forgotten about the lemon her scene, which is wonderful, but there's something in the middle where it feels like he wants her to like go to home with him or something. He's like, where are you staying? You could stay here or something. You're like, what? Is he hitting on her?
With Jack Lemmon?
With Jack Lemmon, sorry. Yeah. And
I'm like, was there a lemon? Did she have a lemon?
Yeah.
Like,
there was a lemon
Jack
right at
Lemmon.
the end of the movie.
But so two just like really random things. I was like, wait, what is happening? When they're driving down, she's driving down with the camera gang with Michael Douglas, and they're driving down. There's a shot from like, I don't know, a helicopter or something, them driving the car, and you could see it's them, and they're handing around like a drink, and it literally looks like they're sharing like a chocolate milk. I'm like, what are they drinking? Like, I was like, it's not water. It doesn't look like water. It literally looks like one of those like quarts of chocolate milk or something. So I don't know what that is. And then hold on, we go home for a hot minute with Jane Fonda one night to hear messages from her mom and some guy who wants her, to hook up with her, where she and her pet tortoise hang.
I know.
She's got a pet turtle. Tortoise.
Yeah.
No, not a turtle.
They're low energy and they're low maintenance.
It's a tortoise.
They are, but she like brings.
She's too busy, honey. She's too busy for a dog or a cat. She can only she takes the tortoise and they share a salad at the end of the night. They each have a little bit of a lettuce, and that's it.
It's just there's a lot in this. Like her character, they really could have punched it home with her being a woman, and it's her struggle of. I get why they don't, but I'm glad that they don't because it would have gotten in the way of everything else.
But it's another layer on there.
Right.
That's what's interesting to me that I like.
It's kind of there, but it's not overwhelmingly there.
Yeah.
Chris, can you get a feeling for what it's like now at home with Susan and I? Just in the car or over.
I don't know how your kids
dinner.
Ever get a word in edge.
They don't.
Hey, you know what? I nothing wrong with that.
They're so annoyed that we actually still love each other and like each other and want to talk. Right. This is pretty much just us standing in the kitchen before inevitably all these conversations end with Susan going, what am I doing standing here talking to you? I've got 3 phone calls I've got to make. I've got emails I've got to send. I've got a podcast I've got to do. I can't just waste my time having fun with you.
I hear you. That's the way life is. You got to go and shut off the nuclear reactor sometime. You can't just have fun with your tortoise all day, as they would say, Jane Fonda.
That's yes. Right. And I'm the tortoise, and Susan's podcast is the reactor.
That's fair.
Yeah, and I kind of scoop him up when I come in the door and carry him like a monkey. For a minute, I thought she had a monkey. Like I couldn't see it.
Would that have been any less strange than a tortoise?
It was pretty strange. And then she sort of just leaves. She like puts it on the bed next to her and you're like, is it going to crawl off the bed? Like, I just got really nervous about the tortoise.
It was just a choice. Somebody was like, we want to see Jane Fonda with a tortoise.
Well, and I think there was a thing of like, well, she wouldn't have a cat or a dog, but we needed it not to be sad. Like, or something, right?
She's a working woman.
If they wanted it not to be sad, they failed.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is not this movie's sad just on its own. So Susan, final thoughts on The China Syndrome.
Oh my God, it's totally worth a watching, and especially as a companion piece to Chernobyl, because I think Chernobyl, it is, a line from China Syndrome to Chernobyl, and just for the performers alone, and everybody in this movie is really great.
Yeah.
What about you, Richard?
If for the young people out there, you have your 80s movies, the movies that it's like, oh, those are the movies that are really the, classic 80s movies. And, you're not going to watch every movie that comes out in a particular decade. But if you're curious about the 70s, there's a lot of movies to watch from the 70s. But if you want one that really feels like the 70s, this is a good one. And it's about a thing that was a thing in the 70s. So I would put this on your list.
Well, and I would agree. It's funny. This movie comes out in 79 and it feels like a 70s movie a lot more than movies that come out in 79 do. It's at the end of the era. It's talking about something that will, like you mentioned with The Simpsons, kind of inform the next 15 to 20 years of pop culture. You'll see nuclear power and nuclear reactors and nuclear this, even to the point where it's pronounced nuke. Clear, to that point. But this is where a lot of that comes from, is from this movie and how popular this movie became, and then 3 Mile Island happening. But it does feel directly in the 70s, and the 70s was full of what kinds of movies? Disaster movies. And this is a disaster movie. The disaster never happens, which is the fun part about this movie. Is it's not Airport, it's what happened if Airport almost happened? It's like Airplane, right? An airplane, they don't crash the plane, they land it. So it's not a disaster movie, but they're dealing with stuff on the airplane. So it feels in the same vein. But yeah, it is a film firmly in the 70s. And like you mentioned, Susan, we're still talking about it today. It still affects our lives. You may be listening to this show on a device that was powered and charged by nuclear energy. I don't know where you live, but more than likely you have been a recipient. Yeah, 10%. Think of me when you turn on that light. So yeah, and again, I had seen this movie a long time ago. It still holds up today. And I would wager a guess 30 years from now, it will still hold up in 2052. So when we're all long irradiated from God knows what nuclear reactor going sideways. So, but until then, until we're all irradiated and long in the ground, Susan, where could people find your show, 80s TV Ladies?
Well, 80s TV Ladies is on Weirding Way Media, one of the shows on that network started by Chris and Mike. And you can find us at 80stvladies.com, and on any podcast platform, just search 80s TV Ladies, 80S TV LADIES. And you can find us on social media at 80s TV Ladies. So it's pretty easy. 80s TV Ladies will get you somewhere to us.
What about you, Richard? Where can people find you?
Well, I'm currently writing and producing HBO Max's hit series DC Titans. And you can get seasons 1, 2, and 3 on HBO Max right now. And we just premiered season 4. We're about 4 episodes in. They drop every Thursday. So season 4, part 1 is currently running, and then part 2, the final 6 episodes of the season, will be a little bit later. I'm not sure exactly when, but check out Titans on HBO Max.
And like Susan mentioned, you can find me and most of the things, everything I work on at weirdingwaymedia.com, along with Susan's show 80s TV Ladies, along with a little show that Richard co-hosts with the aforementioned Mike White and I, Rankin' on Bass, and a whole handful of other things. Richard's been on the Kolchak tapes before. Susan's been on the Culture Cast before. Richard's been on Scary Stories We Tell before. If you're looking for places to hear them specifically, there you go. As for me, weirdingwaymedia.com. As for this show, culturecast.com, patreon.com/culturecast, all the places you can go to donate financially if you want to. If not, I get it. Times are hard, and hey, nuclear winter's always looming, so maybe save your money for the cat food that you're going to be having to eat once all the food runs out. As for me, that's where you can find me. That's where you can find this show. Susan, Richard, thank you so much for joining me. This was fun.
Thank you for having me on and getting us together to do China Syndrome.
We'll have to do another one.
We will.
Maybe something that neither one of you pick.
Oh yeah, that's the way it
Professor
usually is.
Statue, as Richard likes to. Yeah, that's more. That'd be even more fun than just drop you both into the deep end and cling to each other as the movies watch over you.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, and we'll catch you on the next episode.